Welcome to the presentation on planning and control. My name is David Frame. I'm with the University of Management and Technology, and in this presentation I will be explaining what planning and control are, what their functions are, what their value is, and how effective planning and control is very important for organizations if they want to be successful in implementing their projects. So what we need to do at the outset is to see that we really understand what planning and control are. So let's start with what is planning. Okay, I like to visualize a plan as a roadmap. Okay, a roadmap that tells us how to get from point A up to point B. That's how I like to see a plan. I like to have visual images in my mind of concepts. So my image of a plan is a roadmap. Okay, showing us how to get from point A to point B. Now, on the project, getting from point A to point B is starting from the earliest stages before you really implement a project and figuring out what steps need to be taken so that you ultimately travel along your path of the project to ultimately produce a deliverable. At the end of this path, there's a deliverable, and our job in managing projects is to deliver deliverables to our customers. So it's useful to view a plan as a roadmap. Control is the process of examining how you are doing on your trip. Okay, with control we take a look at what we plan to do and what's actually happening. So using the roadmap analogy, as we're taking a trip from Washington, D.C., let's say, to New York City, we have to check every now and then, are we on the right road? When we're at the halfway mark in terms of the number of miles we're traveling, control says, well, how much time has it taken us? Okay, are we basically halfway there from a time point of view? We're halfway there in terms of miles, but how are we doing from a time point of view? Are we having delays? This kind of thing. So with control, you look at actual versus plan with the view of determining how well you're doing. Now, why do you want to know how well you're doing? Well, if you're not doing very well, this may be a symptom that there are problems that need to be fixed. So you've got to fix the problem. If you're going to be traveling to New York to attend an important meeting, you don't want to be late. So you've got to take steps to speed things up. Okay? So basically then you have plan, a roadmap, control, a review of progress along the roadmap. Now, why are these important? What's the significance of planning and control to our projects? Well, projects can be fairly complex undertakings that have many steps. And if these steps are not identified clearly, if the linkage of one step to another step is not identified, if we don't put these various steps into some kind of specific time frame, if we don't nail down actual delivery dates for carrying out each of the different steps, we're going to find that we don't know what we're doing as we carry out our project. That project would not be carried out according to a plan. It would be carried out, the term we like to use comes from Latin. It's called ad hoc. Okay, ad hoc. Ad hoc means basically we just do whatever occurs to us at a given moment in time. There is no real plan that is being implemented. And when you do things in an ad hoc fashion, particularly if they're complex, you tend to introduce tremendous inefficiencies. Okay, can somebody get something done without careful planning? The answer is sure. But the price they're going to pay is tremendous levels of inefficiency. And so by having plans, we sit down and think through what is it we need to do to get from point A to point B. If you're going to go from Washington, D.C. To New York City and you've never done this trip before, you don't just get in the car and start driving north. You pull out the map, you talk to some friends about their experience on what's the best route, you create various milestones, okay, that you want to check out as you're doing the trip to make sure everything is going correctly. So it is with our projects. Okay, so we need to do planning so that we can lay out the path that we're going to travel along. We can give instructions to our project staff. We can give instructions to our contractors. They can give instructions to their subcontractors. Without the plan, nobody knows what's supposed to be done. They have very little idea of what the role is. What's the value of control? It's not enough just to plan things. You have to plan things, and then one thing that we've learned in the last few years is that those plans also have to have metrics. You have to have measures built into them. The most important metric is time. Okay, by what date does something have to be achieved? So with control, what you're doing is not only are you determining, am I traveling the road properly, okay, but am I traveling the road according to the schedule I laid out? In a project we have budgets. Am I taking my trip within the budgetary constraints that I've identified? So control looks at your plan, and then it checks your progress against the plan. So control really is carrying out a tracking function. Now what we're going to do in this presentation is first to do an in-depth look at planning. Okay, so we'll look at what kind of plans do we have on projects? Okay, what does it take to do effective planning on projects? So that's what we're going to focus on in the first segment of this presentation. And then later what we'll do is we'll take a look at control. Okay, what steps do we need to take to make sure that we're doing things the way we're supposed to do them? Let's begin our investigation of what it takes to do effective planning. First, what needs to be planned? That's the first basic question we should address. Now, to identify what needs to be planned, let's take a look at the most basic definition that we have on what is project management and what projects entail. If you ask people to define what is project management to you, they will consistently answer, project management is about getting the job done. Okay, making sure we do what we're supposed to do. That's what project management's about. And then inevitably they add some caveats. They say it's about getting the job done on time, within budget, and according to specifications. And we hear those answers so frequently, on time, within budget, according to specifications, that we've given them a name. We call them the triple constraints. All projects, whether the project is to clean your garage on a weekend or to build a space shuttle, all projects operate under these three constraints. So now think about that. A project is about getting the job done on time, within budget, according to specifications. So we need to plan schedules, that's on time. We need to plan budgets and costs, okay, within budget, and then we need to make plans to actually physically produce the deliverable so that they achieve their specifications. We need to plan for the specifications as well. To a large extent then, the project management planning effort focuses on the three constraints of the triple constraints. You're planning schedules, you're planning costs, you're planning the physical work, so that you identify specifications and then set out to achieve them. So that's what the basic process focuses on. So let's take a look real quickly at each of these areas of planning, and then later on we'll go into them in even more depth. We want to plan to get the job done on time. Okay, that means that we're working with schedules. The schedule tells us when various things, tasks, activities, milestones need to be achieved. So an important part of the planning effort in project management is to identify what the tasks are and then nail down dates, okay, and durations for each of those tasks. Schedules can be carried out in many ways. You can do a schedule very simply on a spreadsheet, where across the top of the spreadsheet you just have various dates. First week of March, second week of March, third week of March, fourth week of March, first week of April, this kind of a thing. and then underneath there you can have identify what tasks have to be carried out at those different points. Okay, that's a type of a milestone chart, but that's a very simple way to put together a schedule, and if you've got a very small project, it's probably good enough. Other technique, the most heavily used technique, is something called a Gantt chart. And we'll cover that in a little more detail later when we go in the depths of scheduling, but Gantt charts are bar charts that show when given tasks will be carried out. If you want to get a little more sophisticated, then you have things like what's called PERT CPM charts. PERT is P-E-R-T. That stands for the Project Evaluation and Review Technique. It was invented back in the 1950s by the United States Navy. CPM stands for Critical Path Method. It was developed by DuPont Corporation to schedule chemical engineering projects, again, back in the 50s. So you have these PERT charts or flow charts that show how the various tasks interconnect. You can do pure milestone charts, where these are, in a sense, the simplest scheduling techniques, where you have a timeline, and then against the timeline you identify critical milestones. And the way you control a project like that is at different points of time you say, did I achieve the milestones I set out to achieve? So with the planning of schedules, very often those are the principal tools we look at. More recently, there have been new scheduling tools that have been developed, things like critical chain scheduling, okay, and then things like time box scheduling. So there's no, if you have a good imagination, there really is no limit to the types of schedules you can put together. The real issue here is, one, are you being conscious in putting together a schedule where you're actually nailing down dates and identifying the work that has to be carried out? And the second issue is the schedule practical for the environment in which you're working? You don't want to carry out a $1 billion schedule using the techniques that you would use on the back of an envelope to run a $10,000 project. You don't want to put together a schedule for a $10,000 project using the tools and techniques that you would use if you were building a large ship. So it has to be appropriate. Okay, the second area, as I mentioned, was the management of budgets. Okay, the planning of budgets, and here basically we have a number of techniques that we can use. Mostly when you talk about managing budgets, you're actually talking about carrying out budget processes. The technique is less a particular tool, it's a process. All organizations that are well managed have clearly defined processes for identifying what the work is that needs to be carried out, and then identifying for that work how much it's going to cost, so that you can allocate a budget to make sure the money is available to allow people to do their job when that task has to be carried out. Okay, we'll take a look at that in more detail, because the budget process, for example, requires a degree of forecasting. It requires a degree of estimation, so you can predict what our financial needs will be 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now. Okay, another planning area when we talk about budgets actually is the human resource aspect of getting the job done. When we talk about planning budgets, that money is being spent to pay for salaries. So it's very hard to budget if you don't know what human resources you need to use to do the job. So part of the budget development process means that you got to be pretty good at identifying human and then also material resources. Material resources are the objects that you buy, the equipment, the materials that are needed to carry out your project work. So there's a whole set of tools in that area to help you plan resource utilization, resource allocation, and that feeds into the budget process. Okay, now when we talk about planning specifications, what we're dealing here is focusing largely on the customer, okay, and identifying what our customers' needs and wants. Ultimately, the specifications we develop to produce a deliverable must address customer needs and wants. You don't just pull specifications out of the thin air. They have to be tied to what it is that our customer wants to do or needs to have done. And that gets us into a whole area. There are many planning tools and techniques to help us get a sense of what customer needs and wants are. And then we also, beyond understanding the needs and wants, in order to achieve the specifications, we have to begin to develop an appreciation for the technical aspects of doing the job. In order to achieve a particular specification, what are the technical constraints under which we operate? For example, if ultimately we're going to build a house, you need to excavate the land. Okay, and part of the excavation process might be to dig a hole to put in a basement. Okay, so you have to know technically that if you're going to be doing this job, that first you excavate broadly, then you dig the hole, then you pour the concrete. Okay, you don't start by pouring concrete and then digging a hole underneath the concrete. That doesn't make sense. So part of the business of dealing with specifications is one, identifying what are the specs, and then two, figuring out how you're going to achieve it. All these things feed into the planning process. So what we'll do is first go in some detail examining scheduling. Okay, I've begun the discussion. Let's now go into a more in-depth view of what effective scheduling entails. So now we're going to take an in-depth view of what planning schedules entails. Now, in project management, the most famous of the various disciplines we have in project management is the time management discipline. To a lot of people, if you ask them, what is project management to you, they'll answer, they'll say, well, it's really about carrying out the project using things like PERT chart. Today, very popular software package is called Microsoft Project, and it's fundamentally a scheduling package. So a lot of people, when they think about project management, they closely associate it today, in the 2000s, they closely associated with some of the scheduling tools that exist out there. Certainly, if you think about it, project management is about managing time. Now, managing time, that's very significant. Think about that, managing time. There are many studies been carried out on how do organizations develop competitive advantage, where you can beat out your competitors as a company, and consistently at the top of the list, one of the ways that you beat your competitors is to do things faster, faster, faster. So to a large extent, competition, effective competition, requires you to be able to do things very effectively and very quickly. That's the expectations our customers have today, that things can be delivered very quickly. So anyone who's going to be competitive needs to master doing things quickly, which means they have to master the management of time. They have to master scheduling, effective scheduling. Now, in project management over the years, we've developed a number of approaches to scheduling, and in a sense I think that's good news and bad news. The good news is that since World War I, there have been a set of techniques that have been developed that help people schedule their work efforts more effectively, and that we can use these techniques and perhaps do a better job in managing time. The bad news is that these techniques have become almost institutionalized. The problem when you have a technique becoming institutionalized, particularly if it's a technique developed a long time ago, is that it kills innovation. People start routinely applying these old techniques, and they don't recognize that as the world changes, some of these old techniques are not terribly relevant anymore. So part of what we have been doing in the last few years in project management is to open our eyes to new approaches, new techniques to help us be more effective in scheduling our project efforts. But the first serious technique that has been very important to project management was developed during World War I, and it's called the Gantt chart, named after an industrial engineer who had the name of Gantt. Now, Gantt charts are bar charts that lay out against a timeline when a given task begins and when it ends. So that these bars that you draw across a page, very simple to create charts like this. You don't need computer software. You can sit down with a pencil and a ruler and paper and start creating Gantt charts right away. What's really nice about these charts is they're very simple to develop. They're very simple to interpret. They're a great communication tool. If I want to do a status report to my boss on what progress I made on my project, or to a customer, okay, or to the members of my team, the way I'm going to show my schedule and progress against the schedule is using a Gantt chart. See, because one bar you'd have here would be, well, here's what we plan, when we plan to do the task, and then next to that bar you create a second bar, different color, let's say, and that shows when the work was actually carried out. So if you compare the plan bar and the actual bar, you can see, are we having schedule slippage, are we ahead of schedule, or are we on target? So that's a great tool. It's very simple to educate people to use it. It's great as a communication tool. You can do briefings of any audience without having to teach them project management. Anybody who's reasonably intelligent can look at a Gantt chart and figure out schedule status. So it's great in that, in its simplicity and its effectiveness to communicate schedule progress. There have been a number of studies carried out on which tools, what percentage of the project management population uses different tools. And I've seen statistics on utilization of Gantt charts that said everything from 90% of projects use them down to 20%. I think the 20% figure is probably more realistic. I know I work with many organizations. I've had tens of thousands of project management students over the years. I get out there, I see a lot of organizations, and I have to say I'd be surprised if more than a third of the projects that I've been associated with have actually used even something so simple and primitive as a Gantt chart in a systematic fashion. The most famous technique, scheduling technique, is PERT charts. Okay, PERT, as I mentioned earlier, stands for Program Evaluation and Review Technique. This PERT charts and critical path method, CPM charts, were invented in the mid to late 1950s as a consequence of innovations being carried out in systems engineering. One of the key tools that we have in systems engineering, systems analysis, is the flow chart. And back in the 50s, a number of engineers carrying out complex projects said, hey, can we use these flow charting techniques that we've just been taught to help us flow chart projects, to enable us to track, to plan our project efforts, and then later on to track our progress on the projects. So the Navy invented PERT charts back in the late 50s as part of the effort to plan the Polaris missile submarine. And then, as I mentioned earlier, DuPont invented a critical path method to help them do some of their chemical engineering projects. Over the years, these techniques have tended to merge together, and most of the software packages you have being sold today, things like Microsoft Project, are really a hybrid. They're a combination of some of the original thinking on PERT, some of the original thinking on CPM. And in fact, to try to avoid confusion, and perhaps we've added to the confusion, but to avoid confusion, should we call it PERT chart or CPM, we've got a new term. We call these diagrams today, we don't call them PERT and CPM, we call them precedence diagrams. Okay, they basically, the term precedent means what happens in what order. So today, something like a PERT CPM chart that appears in Microsoft Project is probably best called a precedence diagram. That's what we're trying to get people to start using, that terminology. Okay, so this technique was developed in the late 1950s, and for the longest time it's been considered our most advanced technique. And if you think about it, that's a little disturbing. When the most advanced technique any discipline has is something that's 50 years old or 45 years old, that's a little disturbing. But anyhow, in many people's opinion, that's our really sophisticated technique for scheduling projects. And so if people learn PERT CPM charts, precedence diagramming, they think that they're really at the leading edge, and of course they're not. There's some new advances in scheduling that we should be aware of as well. By my reckoning, I've seen articles that said that 85% of people on projects use these precedence diagrams. That's absolutely wrong. I don't know where the samples came from that these articles were based on. That's absolutely wrong. By my best estimates, I would say somewhere between 5 and 10 or 15% of projects today use the discipline of precedence diagramming. They may be using Microsoft Project to help set things up, and they may do some very primitive precedence diagrams in order to use Microsoft Project, but in terms of it as an effective, serious, systematic tool, the proportion of projects using this technique is not very high. A third standard technique that we've inherited over the last decades is milestone charts. And with milestone charts, you just identify key milestones that should occur by a specific period of time. So one milestone might be something like end of the testing phase. Another milestone might be end of the installation phase, end of the development phase, beginning of the testing phase, this kind of a thing. So these milestones are markers. That's what a milestone is. It's a marker. And you put these markers against the timeline, and then as a project's being carried out, you have to regularly, routinely check the markers to make sure at different points in time you're doing what you said, you've achieved the milestone you said you were going to achieve. Now those are, I call the legacy tools. Those are tools that have been around forever. I began studying project management back in the late 60s. And those tools were the standard tools they taught us back then. So that's more than 30 years ago, and they're good tools, they're useful, people should be using them, but in recent years we realized that these legacy tools are kind of old, and that we've got to push ourselves in our thinking to come up with some newer tools to help us schedule our project efforts. In the scheduling arena, there are two tools in particular I want to focus on. One is called critical chain scheduling, and that's associated with the work of a production engineering professor named Eliyahu Goldratt. Came originally from Israel, then now lives in the United States. And he developed this technique called critical chain, which has become very hot in the last few years, and people are experimenting with using critical chain scheduling. The other technique was to a large extent the child of the dot-com days, when we had all these new internet companies trying to produce things very, very fast and establishing impossible production deadlines and development deadlines, and sometimes doing a pretty good job. Sometimes they didn't, sometimes they did. One of the techniques that helps them to do a good job was called time box scheduling. So just a quick overview of each of these techniques. Okay, critical chain scheduling points out that traditional precedence diagrams are very limited in what they look at. If you think about it, if you're going to schedule a project with a precedence diagram, with a PERT CPM chart, all you need to do is identify the tasks, okay, what's physically going to be done, the durations of the tasks, okay, how long will it take to do a job, and then the interconnections, the precedence relationships, the dependencies of the tasks, each upon the others. Okay, that's it. That's all you need. That information is all that goes into creating a precedence diagram. Understanding the task, its duration, and how the tasks are interconnected in terms of dependency relationships. Now, that's pretty good, you might say, and it is. It's certainly better than ignoring the identification of tasks and not bothering to compute, estimating its duration, and also not having any idea how one task feeds into another. Of course, doing a precedence diagram increases your capacity to understand what needs to be done. But by themselves, these items ignore a lot of the friction we have in organizations. Okay, friction. The assumption is with the precedence diagram that the resources are going to show up, okay, and that they will do the work in the prescribed time period and so on and so forth. The reality is that when you're actually carrying out a project, a crisis may emerge somewhere in your organization, and then these resources are delayed in arriving, let's say. Or let's say, because the work needs to be done, they send you some resources that are not as competent as the resources we planned to use. So critical change scheduling says, let's take into account friction that will affect how good we can be in implementing the schedules we develop. What are some friction points that we have to be sensitive to? Okay, so critical change scheduling says, let's look for the bottlenecks. That's what Goldrat's famous for. Okay, this idea of if you're going to do any work, a production process, schedule a project, a key thing you've got to identify are what are the bottlenecks, okay, the bottlenecks that are going to affect how good a job we can carry out. Now, a very major bottleneck in projects is the availability of resources. So with critical change scheduling, what you do is you not only look at the tasks and their estimated durations and their interdependencies, but concurrently you're looking at the availability of resources that can feed into doing the job. And if it looks like these resources won't be available, then you have to adjust your precedence diagram accordingly. So in a nutshell, that's a key element of what critical change scheduling focuses on. What's appealing about it is that it takes into account the friction we have in the real world. And projects, heaven know, are filled with friction. Things so rarely work out the way they're supposed to work out. So a scheduling technique that accommodates friction and problems, I think, is a more realistic scheduling technique. The other scheduling technique that's hot today is time box scheduling. And the best way to illustrate this is just to give an example. Okay, let's take a look at an internet company that's trying to be very innovative and produce goods faster than their competitors. You may have a senior management team deciding that a new product X, needs to be developed, okay, in order to give the company a competitive advantage. So it'll go to the technical staff and say, okay, here's a product, take a look at this, what will it take for you guys and gals to produce this product? So the technical team will sit down, they'll work it out, they'll work out the logic, they'll do a little bit of their own technical planning, and after a period of time they'll come back to the executive committee of senior managers and say, we can do this job in 6 months. And then you'll find senior management pushing back saying, whoa, in 6 months our competitors can have even better products out. We really need this product in 3 months. So this is a very common occurrence these days, that technically to do what we want to do will take 6 months. But practically, if we're going to make it in the marketplace, we need to do the job in 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. Okay, now we have a saying in America, you can't put 10 pounds of mud into a 5-pound bag. Okay, and expecting to do a 6-month job, if technically it takes 6 months to do a job, for senior management to command, we want you to do the job in 3 months, if they insist on that, then something's got to give. Okay, it can't be done. You can't do a 6-month job, okay, in 3 months if the laws of nature says it takes 6 months to do the job. So with time box scheduling, what happens is this. The business users, in this case the executive committee and the technical team, get together in a room, okay, they close the doors, and what they do is they start negotiating, okay, if we're going to deliver a product that's going to be attractive in the marketplace in 3 months, okay, what features should we include in it, and which of the features that we had in our original plan should be thrown out? We can't deliver everything. So with time box scheduling then, the business user and the technical team work together to prioritize the features that the product has. At the top of the list are the most important features, at the bottom of the list, unimportant features. For the first version of the product, which will come out in 3 months, let's throw out the low priority features. Okay, so that's how it works. So this isn't easy to do. Customers don't want to give up anything. The technical team will be making all sorts of noise about how if you eliminate these features, it's going to ruin the technical integrity of the deliverable, but somehow the two sides got to get together, and we've got to reduce the scope of what it is we're going to produce so we can come out with something in 3 months. And it may be very important to get something out in 3 months so that we can beat our competitors in the marketplace. Now, what happens is, by identifying the core features, the high priority core features, we can start applying the 80-20 rule. What we're saying here is, let's identify a small number of very important features that lead to the greatest amount of customer satisfaction. Putting it in terms of 80-20 rule, let's identify 20% of the top features, which if we deliver in 3 months, will lead to 80% of the customer satisfaction levels. Okay, so by following the 80-20 rule, prioritizing, choosing the top handful of things that will lead to high levels of customer satisfaction, we can develop goods much faster than if we try to develop everything at one time. An irony, an interesting outcome of this is that once you get that first feature out in 3 months, you can immediately turn your attention to adding more features, and you may find that in 6 months, the original schedule, you actually have a fully developed product. So again, time box scheduling is a new technique. It's not at all clean like PERT CPM charts. Time box scheduling involves lots of judgment. It involves quick decision making. It's kind of hard to plan. The basic plan is to constantly revisit what you've done, okay, and then to adjust the plan to take advantage of various opportunities that may arise as you're developing the product that you're developing. So in my discussion here of the planning our time, doing scheduling efforts, I've condensed basically a 2 or 3 day course into a short treatment of what's involved with effective scheduling. To understand scheduling really well, of course, you need to go out and practice putting together schedules. In terms of studying scheduling, it does involve several days, maybe actually a couple of weeks worth of coursework spread out over a period of a year or two, so that the scheduling techniques begin to sink in, that you begin to absorb them. But what we have done here is to cover some of the basic high-level issues. Let's turn our attention now to planning budgets. Okay, and perhaps I'm using that term. I'm using the term too narrowly when I say planning budgets, because when we talk about planning budgets, we're really talking about a very broad area that the Project Management Institute calls cost management. Okay, because what we're going to discuss when we talk about planning budgets is identifying, for example, what our resource requirements are, our human and material resource requirements. Do we need electrical engineers on this job? How many electrical engineers? What kind of equipment do we need to order to do the job? What are the material requirements we have? Do we need to order bricks and concrete? These kinds of things. So we have to, when you talk about planning budgets, you also get into the whole area of planning human and material resources. And there's a number of techniques to help people plan human and material resources that goes out of the budgetary realm. Okay, there are a different set of techniques than you cover normally when you talk about budgeting. Also, when we're talking about planning our budgets, we get into the very important topic of estimation. Okay, we need to estimate what the costs are going to be. We need to estimate what possible revenue streams are associated with these costs. And in order to be good at estimation, you need to know a little bit of forecasting. Okay, forecasting is the art and science of being able to project what's going to happen in the future and use that information to make decisions today. So you can see when we talk about planning budgets, there's a lot more going on here than simply sitting down with a spreadsheet and month by month saying, well, $10,000 we need for March. Okay, there's going to be more work in April, so we need $20,000. June should be quiet, so we need only 8,000. That's not how you do a budget. So let's take a look at these different dimensions of effective planning of our budgets. Okay. First of all, as I just mentioned, we need to identify what our resource requirements are, because our money is going to be spent. Okay, the money we're budgeting for is money to be spent on salaries, on purchases of equipment and materials. So that becomes the basis of establishing a budget, is identifying what are our human and material resource requirements. Now, in project management, we've developed a number of standard tools for trying to get a handle on resource requirements. The simplest and most primitive tool, very useful in the beginning of the planning stage, is something called a resource matrix. Also, a lot of people call it a responsibility chart. And what a responsibility chart or resource matrix does is it shows who are the people we need in our project. Okay, so that goes across the top, and then along the side is a listing of tasks. What are they going to do? So who do we have and what work will they do? And then you go through this chart and you just check off. Okay, do we need an electrical engineer to do the electrical work? Do we need mechanical engineers to do the machine installation? These kinds of things. You just put check marks. It doesn't require a computer, but it gives us very valuable information. And it doesn't require you to estimate how many people, when you need them. It's just saying, who do we need to do what work? That's it. Okay, very valuable. That's called the resource matrix, also called responsibility chart. Once you have a good idea of who you need to do what work, at this particular point, you need to do some more serious digging, more serious research investigation. Because at this point you want to create a resource spreadsheet. With a resource spreadsheet, you want to take a look at the various resources you've identified and start determining exactly when do we need them. Do I need them in week 3, week 4, week 5? And then how many of these resources do I need during that period of time? So the resource spreadsheet adds a lot more information to the information we have built into the responsibility chart. Okay, because the responsibility chart just says who do you need to do what work. The resource matrix says, okay, for these people that we're looking at, these resources we're looking at, when should they be applied to the work and how many? Okay, how many of these resources? What level of effort do we need to take into account? So that requires lots of work, and the way you develop a chart like that is if you're in charge of putting together the resource matrix here, is you talk to the functional managers, the bosses of the workers, you talk to the workers, you talk to the technical staff who are putting together the precedence diagram to see physically when the work needs to be done. You do some preliminary discussion, you take your results, you write it all down on a piece of paper, okay, you do your assessment. Once you think you have a good first shot at creating a resource spreadsheet, bring these people into a room, lock the doors. You don't let the people leave the room until basically they've given you feedback on your first attempt at putting together this chart. Don't let them leave the room until they've all signed off on it, saying, okay, I've given my input. You can use this as the beginning point of planning resource allocations. Okay, so the second step of creating the resource matrix is very, very important. It's also not easy to do. And even after you've gotten the signatures, we all know that the information you have embedded in your resource matrix here, spreadsheet here, is going to start changing. But anyhow, planning means that you got to recognize that things are going to change, and you do the best job you can with the information you have. So at this point, that resource spreadsheet represents the best job we can do, given the limited information we have for planning the resource effort. Now you can take that information and start converting it into dollars. These different resources are paid certain salaries, and they have certain overhead costs associated with them. So for every hour of Martha's time, we may be spending, it may be costing us $50 to employ Martha. So if we're going to use Martha for 10 hours, so 10 hours times $50, that's $500. So with that information, now we can actually start putting together a physical budget based on the data we have. So we've gone from identifying resource requirements, and at this stage now we're able to convert some of that into actual dollar figures for budget purposes. Now I mentioned that in order to do these things, it does require a good deal of skill in estimation, which requires some insights into forecasting. So where do estimation and forecasting come into this? Okay, well, one thing, for example, is we said that Martha's going to work for 10 hours to do a job. Somebody has to estimate that that's a 10-hour job. Okay, so how do we estimate? Why didn't we say 5 hours? Why didn't we say 20 hours? Where did we come up with the 10-hour figure? So this makes another connection, by the way, because we see here that coming up with a budget does require us also to already have a good sense of the physical work effort. We have to actually plan the schedule. It's very hard to create a budget if you don't have some sense of how long it's going to take to do the tasks that use the resources. So you can start seeing with this budget effort, things are getting a little bit complex and messy. And in order to plan the schedule, we've got to do lots and lots of estimating. Lots of estimating of what work needs to be done, how long it takes to do it, that kind of thing. So I think effective budgeters, are people who have a good sense of the whole picture of what needs to be done in order to carry out a project work. They understand what's going on with the schedule. They are able to identify what resources need to be used and how many resources, how long they need to be used, and then they're adept at putting all this stuff together to come up with a single budget. Now, a key tool we have for reporting our budget requirements is something called the cumulative cost curve, also called an S-curve, okay, because it takes on the shape of an S. If you were to look at your month-by-month budget data and put it onto a graph, it would go up and down. Some months you spend more money, other months you spend less money, other months more money, less money, and so forth. And that graph is going to look pretty messy, particularly when you want to compare what you plan to do, your budget, and then what's actually happening. Okay, and the two lines might not coincide, and it may become very difficult to interpret what's going on. So what we've done is we've developed a tool where you take those monthly data and you add them up in a cumulative sense. Add the data from month 1 to month 2. Add the data from month 1 and 2 to month 3. Add the data from months 1, 2, and 3 to month 4, and add these things up. And as you're adding them up, you're going to see the curve takes on an S shape. It doesn't go up and down. If on a given month you're not spending any money, it doesn't go down, it stays flat. Okay? So that's the dominant tool we use then for actually capturing graphically what's happening with our budget. It shows that our budget, over time, our money is going to be projected to be spent like this month by month or week by week, whatever units of analysis you use. So when we talk about planning our budgets then, what I want to leave you with is that to be effective in planning budgets, you've got to be sensitive to resource requirements. You've got to have a good sense of the project schedule. You have to be able to get a good sense of project schedule and resource requirements. You have to know something about how to estimate these things. You have to be able then to convert all these things into dollar figures. One last point. A few years ago I did a survey of 165 project professionals, and I asked them, one of the questions I asked them in the survey was, do you have good cost data, good budget data to help you implement your projects? And something like only 20–30% said yes. Okay, that means 70–80% basically said, no, I don't have good cost data. From a cost management point of view, when I'm carrying out my project, I just don't have good cost data. And so in a sense they're flying blind. Basically as they're carrying out the work, I guess they cross their fingers and say, well, I hope I'm not spending too much money because I don't even know how much money I have to spend, this kind of a thing. Now, if you're facing that situation, don't give up. One thing that the Defense Department in the United States showed us a couple of decades ago is if you don't have dollar data, use something called level of effort data. Okay, level of effort data is a good substitute for dollar data. It's a different type of budgeting. Now here's what level of effort data is. I got 3 people, okay, working 5 days. Okay, 3 people, 5 days, that's 15 person days of effort. Okay, that's a substitute for dollar figures. In fact, if you correlate level of effort data, how many person days or person hours of work is carried out, against budget data, you're going to see the two correlate very closely. And in fact, if you know these people are being paid $100 a day, and you just estimated 3 people are scheduled to work 5 days, 15 person days of effort, you can even estimate a dollar budget. Okay, you can say, well, that's about $1,500 of budget that we're going to spend to have these 3 people work 5 days at $100 a day per person. Okay, so so in a nutshell, again, we've summarized probably a 1 or 2 week course on budgeting in this short period of time, but it gives us a sense of what needs to be done to do effective planning of budgets. Okay, if you recall, and when you ask project managers and project professionals to define their job, they say, my job is to get the job done on time, within budget, according to specifications. So let's look at we've already looked at the time management, we looked at budget, cost management. Let's take a very quick look at the specifications. This is an area that could literally be a full semester, 2-semester course. Planning to do effective putting together and managing, putting together specifications effectively, and then actually achieving those specifications. I'm just going to say something very basic at this point, and that is that when we talk about planning to achieve specifications, the planning process largely focuses on identifying what our customers' needs and requirements. That's the planning effort to a large extent. Okay, I mean, where do specifications come from? Do they just fall out of the sky? No, of course not. Those specifications ultimately have to be tied back to customer needs and wants. If you've developed a set of specifications that don't correspond to customer needs and wants, when you finally present your deliverable to customers, they're not going to be happy with it. It's not addressing their needs and wants. So when we talk about planning to develop good specifications, the planning effort requires a lot of investigative work on our part. Okay, today the leading person who does this kind of effort on good practice organizations in government and the private sector are called business analysts. Business analysts are people who initially, in the old days, had a technical background, who over time migrated to the business side of the business. So today they're familiar with the business, they also know something about the technology, and they're in the best position, in a sense, to bridge what I call the business technology gap. So to a large extent then, the planning of specifications requires these business analysts to go out, they're going to meet with customers, they'll interview them, they really understand the business, they know what the customers are talking about, they'll meet with the technical team, discuss the technical issues, they understand the technology, they came out of the technical area originally, and then to get these two groups together. Today the best way to develop specifications and requirements and specifications is to get the business folks and the technical folks together and have the business analysts facilitate, okay, a session where the two sides get together, try and identify what requirements can be developed to address customers' wants and needs, and then take these requirements another step further, make them very detailed technical requirements, which is to say, to turn them into specifications. So basically, at this stage in our discussion, when we're talking about planning for specifications, that's all we can say without getting into so much depth that we really need to set aside days or weeks of careful effort to learn more about this topic. Well, we've covered the basic areas of planning that people engage in when they're doing project work. We took a look at what it takes to plan our time effort by creating schedules. We took a look at planning budgets. We gave a very short treatment just now to planning to develop effective specifications. To wrap up this presentation, what I'd like to do is just to address a question that's directed to me all the time. One of the most frequent questions I hear when I'm doing work in the project management area is how sophisticated should we be in planning our project effort? Okay, should we be out there using the most advanced state-of-the-art techniques? Should we just be planning our effort on the back of an envelope? Okay, how sophisticated should we be? There are many tools and techniques, and in this presentation I've only talked about the best known tools and techniques. There's lots and lots of other tools and techniques as well that you could be using. What does it make sense to use? Okay, and what's inappropriate? This kind of a thing. So I get that question all the time. And my response to the question is, you need to plan. You have to be very practical when you're talking about planning a project effort. Plan at whatever the appropriate level is. A $10,000 project, as I mentioned earlier, certainly is going to be using a much simpler approach to scheduling and budgeting and allocating resources and these kinds of things than a $1 billion project. In fact, on a $10,000 project, if you start getting too fancy in your planning, you may be spending $20,000 to plan a $10,000 effort. That doesn't make sense. So on a $10,000 effort, it's the kind of you're in a kind of situation where you can do a lot of back-of-the-envelope types of planning. Okay. Now, one of the good things is that the $10,000 effort, you're dealing probably with a pretty short time frame. And when we're trying to plan in the short time frame, we have much more certainty about what's going to happen than when you're trying to plan 3 years out. When you got a 3-year plan, after about 3 months, everything starts becoming vague and uncertain. So on the smaller projects, you actually don't need more detailed planning. Okay, you don't need the sophisticated tools. On the other hand, when you're doing larger programs, larger projects, and building big things, you've got to get more and more formal in the planning process. One approach that we haven't discussed here, but we'll talk about when we talk about project control, is a technique called the earned value management approach, the earned value management system. And with earned value management, you have a pretty formal, and if you really apply it heavily, you have a burdensome technique for tracking what's actually happening on your project, and especially if it's a very large project, you need to track what's happening at the very highest level, at the $1 billion level, and then also you need to track what's happening at the $100,000 level. So you have techniques out there for planning and control that allow you to track these things at a very fine level of detail. The price you pay is on $1 billion programs, you pay 65 cents for every dollar, just trying to maintain the management infrastructure to be able to carry out the project. So how much planning and control should you do? How sophisticated? How big is your project? How advanced is the technology? State-of-the-art projects, by the way, don't permit lots of planning. If something's state-of-the-art, we don't know what's going to happen next week. We don't know what's going to happen a month from now. So even though we would like to plan these state-of-the-art projects in detail, we may find, because they're state-of-the-art and we have very limited information, we're unable to do sophisticated detailed planning. So when you're thinking about this, when you're looking at your next project and you're trying to figure out, okay, should I go out and buy a Microsoft project and start using it right now on this particular project, ask yourself, is the effort, the cost of implementing this software package, learning it, using it, and so forth, is that cost of doing that going to be substantially less, will be less than the benefits you're going to derive? If you're spending more money to plan things and you're ultimately going to derive benefits, then that doesn't seem to be a very effective way of doing the planning. What makes sense? What can people learn? Well, what's too much burden? What's not enough burden? We don't want to underplan. We also don't want to overplan. So these are the kinds of things you need to take into account when you address the question, how sophisticated should I be? How much planning and control should I do?
Bye.